Iran just tried to break the American blockade, and the U.S. Navy turned two of its oil tankers into floating wrecks before breakfast. On the morning of May 8, 2026, in the Gulf of Oman, a single F/A-18 Super Hornet launched from the USS George H.W. Bush rolled in and fired precision munitions directly into the smokestacks of two Iranian-flagged tankers attempting to slip into an Iranian port. The MT Star 3 and the MT Sevda gone, disabled, dead in the water. And what makes this strike so devastating is not just the technical precision, it is what it reveals about the Islamic Republic right now. Because at this very hour, Iran is running out of places to put its own oil. Satellites are picking up a 20-square-mile slick off Kharg Island, and Tehran has been reduced to seizing tankers, carrying its own crude just to look powerful on state television. Tonight, we are going to walk you through exactly how the U.S. Navy is strangling Iran's oil empire one ship at a time, why Tehran's response is the most desperate move we have seen yet, and why this could be the moment the Islamic Republic finally cracks. Now let's go to the facts. According to a CENTCOM statement issued on Friday morning, U.S. Central Command or CENTCOM intercepted and disabled the MT Star 3 and the MT Sevda before either vessel could reach an Iranian port on the Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM specified that an F/A-18 Super Hornet launched from the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush, hull number CVN-77, fired precision munitions into the vessel's smokestacks. That phrasing is important. The U.S. Navy did not sink these tankers. They surgically removed the ship's ability to move under their own power. CNN military analyst Cedric Leighton, a retired U.S. Air Force colonel, told CNN reporters on May 9th that it is possible the Navy jet fired inert munitions enough to disable but not detonate. Other military experts cited by CNN, including Peter Leighton, a fellow at the Griffith Asia Institute, and a former Royal Australian Air Force officer, said the F/A-18 likely used 500-pound laser-guided bombs. That's roughly 227 kilograms of munition dropped from altitude guided by laser designation onto a target the size of a city bus smokestack moving at sea. The pattern in the videos confirms it. A slight puff of smoke from the Star 3, then dark smoke pouring from the funnel area, and on the Sevda clip, a single burst of flame followed by heavy black smoke. No secondary explosions, no fuel detonation, no casualties reported, no environmental disaster. Just two ships dead in the water with surgical wounds in their stacks. Maritime shipping expert Sal Mercoliano, a professor at Campbell University in North Carolina, told CNN his frame-by-frame examination of the strike footage showed the munitions hitting the lower portion or base of the smokestacks, the exact spot where the funnel meets the engine room ducting. That is not luck. That is targeting that takes years of carrier aviation training to execute. This is what world-leading naval aviation looks like in 2026. And these two tankers are not alone. According to the same May 8th CENTCOM statement reported by Stars and Stripes, U.S. forces have now redirected 57 commercial vessels and disabled 4 overall since the blockade began. Reuters and Military Times confirmed that the U.S. Navy blockade officially started on April 13, 2026, after the Islamabad talks failed to end the 2026 Iran war. The first direct action came on April 19th when the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, or MEU, working with the destroyer USS Spruance, boarded and seized the Iranian-flagged vessel Tuska. By April 22nd, President Donald Trump publicly claimed the blockade was costing Iran $500 million per day. $500 million every single day. That is more than $15 billion a month vanishing from a regime whose entire foreign currency lifeline depends on getting crude oil to buyers, most of which sit in China. CENTCOM. Commander Admiral Brad Cooper, speaking on Friday, declared U.S. forces in the Middle East remain committed to full enforcement of the blockade of vessels entering or leaving Iran. That is not diplomatic language. That is the sound of a man telling Tehran the chokehold is not loosening, it is tightening. And Iran has no naval power left to push back against a Nimitz-class carrier strike group. And it gets worse for the Islamic Republic. But we will explain what that looks like in just a moment. Here is where things get really interesting. The two tankers struck on May 8th were unladen, meaning they were running empty. They were trying to get into Iranian ports specifically because Iran is desperate to bring empty hulls home to use as floating storage. According to the New York Times reporting on May 8th citing Dalga Katinoglu of Iran Open Data, the U.S. naval blockade has trapped hundreds of ships in the Gulf and is causing the largest single disruption to crude oil supply since the start of the war. Tankers are stranded, exports are constrained, and Iran is, in Katinoglu's exact phrasing, rapidly running out of places to store its oil. Now think about what that means in plain language. The Islamic Republic produces millions of barrels per day. If they cannot ship it out, and they cannot store it on land, and they cannot bring tankers in to use as floating warehouses, there is only one place that oil can go. And the satellites have already seen it. Now let's move on to the second scenario, and this is the one that should send a chill down Tehran's spine. Between May 6th and May 8th, satellite imagery from the European Union's Copernicus Sentinel, 1 Sentinel-2, and Sentinel-3 satellites, as published by Reuters and the Jerusalem Post, captured a suspected oil spill spreading off the western coast of Kharg Island. Kharg Island, the single most important piece of energy infrastructure inside the Islamic Republic. The hub for roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports, much of it bound for China. According to estimates by Orbital EOS, a global oil spill monitoring service cited by the New York Times, the slick covered more than 20 square miles with as much as 3,000 barrels of oil released. 20 square miles. To put that in context, that is an area larger than the entire island of Manhattan drifting across the surface of the Persian Gulf in the form of crude oil. Leon Moreland, researcher at the Conflict and Environment Observatory, said the slick appears visually consistent with oil and could be the largest spill in the region since the war began 70 days ago. Louis Goddard of the consultancy Data Desk, which focuses on climate and commodities, agreed. The images, he said, almost certainly show an oil slick, and here is the part Tehran cannot spin. 3 theories are on the table. Theory 1, a leak from a poorly maintained, decades-old undersea pipeline connecting Kharg with the Abazar offshore field, a pipeline that has ruptured before, including a major breach in October 2024. Theory 2, overloaded floating storage on tankers parked at Kharg leaking under pressure. Theory 3, and this is the one that has Western analysts whispering Iran deliberately dumping crude into the Persian Gulf because it has nowhere else to put it. There is no confirmed evidence for Theory 3 yet, but signs are pointing toward it. Why? Because Tehran has confirmed over the past week that oil production has been reduced precisely because of the U.S. blockade. Nima Shakri, a professor of environmental engineering at the Hamburg University of Technology, told the New York Times that the naval blockade has likely pushed Iran's oil system to its operational limits. And if you cannot export and you cannot store, you either shut down the wells, which is catastrophic for a regime already on its knees economically, because restarting a closed-down field can take weeks and damage reservoir pressure permanently, or you let the oil flow into the sea. That is the choice the Islamic Republic is being forced to make. And environmental analysts warn that even a manageable spill, in the words of Iranian-Canadian environmental engineer Reza Hosseini, can become a regional environmental crisis if response is delayed. That is what surgical American sea power looks like, not a single shot fired at Kharg this week, and yet the regime's flagship export terminal is bleeding oil into the Gulf in front of Saudi Emirati and Bahraini coastlines. But before we get to that, this is a quick reminder that you're watching my channel. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines. So hit subscribe to ensure you stay ahead of the curve. Now let's talk about the third scenario, and this is where the desperation theater begins. Hours before the U.S. Navy disabled the Sea Star 3, and the Sevda Iranian state television announced something that on the surface sounded like a powerful countermove. The Iranian Navy had seized the oil tanker Ocean Koi, also known as Jinli, in the Gulf of Oman. According to Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, reporting on May 8th citing Iran's Fars news agency, an Iranian spokesperson claimed the Ocean Koi was attempting to disrupt oil exports and the interests of the Iranian nation. State-owned Press TV released video of Iranian commandos boarding and detaining the ship. So far, this looks like a serious flex. Iran seizing a tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, a direct challenge to U.S. naval operations. Until you read the next paragraph. According to oilprice.com, on May 8th, the Ocean Koi is registered in Barbados, managed by a Chinese company, and it had already been under U.S. Treasury OFAC sanctions since February. Why? Because it was carrying Iranian crude oil. Let that sink in. Iran just dramatically seized a Chinese-managed U.S.-sanctioned tanker that was already loaded with Iranian oil in the name of, quote, defending Iranian oil exports. They seized their own oil. That is not strength. That is a regime running out of moves and putting on a show for state television. And there is one more layer to this humiliation. Just 3 days earlier, on May 5th, Iranian forces accidentally struck a Chinese-flagged commercial vessel during their own missile and drone activity in the Strait. China, the one country still buying Iranian oil at scale, is now watching its own ships get attacked by Iran and seized by Iran in the same week. Beijing has not made any public condemnation yet. But Tehran's most important customer is now its most embarrassed witness. And that brings us to the fourth and most dangerous possibility the moment American patience finally snapped. On May 5, 2026, Secretary of State Marco Rubio stood in the James Brady press briefing room at the White House and declared that Operation Epic Fury, the roughly 2-month offensive operation that opened the war on February 28, was effectively over. According to Time magazine reporting on that briefing, Rubio said the United States was shifting to a defensive posture, quote, "This is not an offensive operation. There is no shooting unless we are shot at first." That was Tuesday. By Thursday, May 7th, Iran shot at U.S. Navy warships, according to a CENTCOM statement reported by Military Times 3 U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers, the USS Truxtun, the USS Rafael Peralta, and the USS Mason, were transiting the Strait of Hormuz when Iranian forces launched missiles, drones, and small boats at all three. The U.S. response was immediate: self-defense strikes against Iranian launch sites. President Trump told ABC News later that day that the strikes were merely a, quote, love tap, and that the Iranian attacking forces had been completely destroyed. He then said the destroyers would rejoin what he called the U.S. Wall of Steel blockade around Iran. And on May 8th, speaking to reporters in Rome, Marco Rubio drew the cleanest red line of this entire war. The red line is clear. Rubio said, if they threaten Americans, they're going to get blown up. He then added, only stupid countries don't shoot back when you're shot at. And we're not a stupid country. That is not diplomatic ambiguity. That is the United States Secretary of State telling the Islamic Republic on the record that every Iranian fast boat, drone, and missile that points itself at a U.S. destroyer is a target the moment it leaves the launcher. Now here is what we cannot ignore. Iran's leadership has spent the past 2 weeks claiming on state television that its missile capability has actually grown stronger since the start of the war. But the evidence on the ground tells a completely different story. If the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, were truly stronger today than they were in March, then why has the frequency of Iranian missile launches declined as the war has dragged on? Why is the U.S. Navy able to enforce a blockade that has now turned away 57 commercial vessels and disabled 4 of them, including the Sea Star 3 and the Sevda, with no Iranian warship intervention? Why is Iran's response to losing 2 tankers in one morning to seize a Chinese-managed ship carrying its own oil? Analysts believe the answer is simple. Iran does not have a real navy left to defend its coastline. According to Marco Rubio's own May 8th press conference, Iran does not have a navy anymore. What they have are little Boston whaler fishing boats that they bring out to swarm U.S. destroyers. Rubio said it directly: if I were one of these Iranians on a fast boat and they tell you your mission is to go after a U.S. destroyer, you're probably not going to survive. The Islamic Republic is not deterring the United States Navy. The Islamic Republic is being humiliated by it, and the consequences are already rippling far beyond the Gulf. Gulf states are watching this in real time, and they have made a decision. According to Al Jazeera reporting on May 3rd, the U.S. State Department approved over $8 billion in arms sales to Persian Gulf countries on May 1st alone, including a $4.01 billion replenishment of Qatar's Patriot missile capacity and a $2.5 billion integrated battle command system for Kuwait. But the bigger number comes from Defense News and Al Monitor, which reported that across March and May, the Trump administration has fast-tracked roughly $25 billion in air defense and counter-drone packages to the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Jordan, including $5 billion for a long-range radar in the UAE designed to integrate with the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, an $8 billion lower-tier air and missile defense sensor, or LTAMDS package for Kuwait, and a $2.1 billion fixed-site counter-drone system for the UAE. Marco Rubio invoked emergency authority under the Arms Export Control Act to bypass the customary congressional notification period. Translation: American air defense weapons just performed in live combat, and the entire Gulf is now lining up to buy them. Every Iranian missile and drone that gets shot down over Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia is, in effect, a live commercial for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Iran is funding the U.S. defense industry's biggest sales surge in a generation by attacking the people who buy the weapons. What this means for Iran is catastrophic. Their oil empire is shattered. Their navy is humiliated. Their state television is forced to dress up the seizure of their own tankers as a victory. Their main export terminal at Kharg Island is bleeding crude into the Persian Gulf, and the Gulf states they spent decades trying to intimidate are now buying $25 billion in American air defense weapons specifically to keep shooting Iranian missiles out of the sky. The U.S. Navy is enforcing a blockade that costs Tehran $500 million a day. The Strait of Hormuz, which the regime once threatened to close at will, is now a killbox, where Iranian fast boats are warned by the U.S. Secretary of State that their next mission will probably be their last. And the world is watching this play out and learning a lesson that no nation, not even one that has spent 40 years claiming to control a global choke point, gets to decide on its own that international waters belong to it. Roughly 20 to 25% of the world's seaborne oil normally passes through the Strait of Hormuz, along with about 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. That is not Iranian water. That is global water. If the world allowed Iran to shut down Hormuz on a whim, the precedent would invite every revisionist regime on Earth to do the same in their own waters: China at the South China Sea, Russia in the Black Sea and Baltic. The United States is not just defending tanker traffic. The United States is defending the entire framework of freedom of navigation that has held global commerce together since the end of the Second World War. And it is doing so with a single carrier strike group, a Super Hornet squadron, and a Secretary of State who refuses to play word games. The real question now is this: if the blockade keeps tightening, if the oil keeps leaking, if the regime keeps losing tankers and dignity in equal measure, how long can the Islamic Republic stand before something inside Tehran finally breaks? The answer to that could reshape the entire Middle East for a generation. And that is the reality the Islamic Republic is waking up to tonight. 2 tankers gone, 57 ships redirected, an oil spill bleeding off Kharg Island, and a U.S. Secretary of State telling them on camera that there are no more red lines to debate. If you want to stay on top of every move in this war as it happens, subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications. We'll see you on the next one.